For the technique I'm about to describe, I think it can be used in most forms of art, drawing, acting, you name it, but I'm going to use writing as an example. And what I want to talk about is the different ways that we are critics to our artwork. And there's one type of critic that we become that we want to completely eliminate. So have you ever known anyone that seems like they put their foot in their mouth without even knowing it and say things that offend people or just don't seem fully formed before they say it? And now I think that there are a lot of artists out there that get their reputation as being socially inept, and I think there are a lot of cases for those artists where they don't have a functioning inline critic the way most people do. I'm not telling you to start to speak without thinking when you're with other people. I'm just saying that the critic that sort of looks over and organizes and makes more clear the things you're about to say while you're talking, that critic is very effective socially, but is not effective when you're working on your art. An artist I can think of is Lars von Trier, the director of Melancholia. He was in the news. He said a lot of things that got him kicked out of the Cannes Festival. And I'm not a psychologist, but I get the impression that he makes me think of an artist who possibly does not have that inline critic, which gets him into a lot of trouble in public, but can make him a better artist. What I'm proposing is that when you're doing your art, you really want to focus on disabling that inline critic. The more that you do that, the more that you practice doing that, the better artist you're going to become. And the inline critic is necessary in public. Don't disable it in public. It's not a good idea to speak without thinking. But I think there are people that have this idea that when you're writing, to be a great writer, what you need is to just sit down and be able to the pure gold of writing just comes out on the page. And I'd say that hardly ever is the case. And for the chance of that ever being the case, one thing you would need to do would be to disable the inline critic. Because even if you're all, you have the ideas, the inspiration, and everything to be all set up to start, just putting that gold down on the page, there would still be that inline critic, interfering, saying, is this good? Is that working? And it will interrupt the flow. So, when you're writing, it's sort of like if you want to get the best parts, if you want to get good writing, you also need to produce a lot of writing that, for the most part, you won't end up using. And if you're looking at your writing while you're writing or before you write it and say that isn't good or that doesn't work or that needs to be changed around, you're doing it prematurely. I'm talking about the idea of starting to think on the page, of being in the practice of getting it in the page, getting it out in the world before you even begin to organize it, clarify it, and ask yourself, is this good enough? Is this going to work? Will this work with what I'm trying to do? So the more that you get all of that down on the page before you start to arrange it and eliminate things, the better. The inline critic can be a great interference and can make the work very difficult and can really bring you down as a writer and make it not very much fun, and it gets in the way and it's trying to make things better, but it doesn't because it's premature. So writing as a practice is about thinking on the page. It's about getting everything down there in all its raw form before you have a chance to shape it. It's not about it's more than not worrying if it's good enough. It's about getting all the ideas down so that you can work at them while you're looking at them. And if you practice this is a practice where you sit down and you just write anything that comes to mind. It's something that you get better at. To sit back and think, oh, I can do that. That doesn't work. It's a practice, to sit back and think, oh, I can run a mile. It doesn't work that way. It's a practice. You go and you run a mile, 3 days a week. So you write with no inline critic 3 days a week. And criticizing our own work and changing it and shaping it and making it better, that's an important part, but it has its place. If someone is going to harvest apples, what they do is they go and they climb through all the branches and they pick out the apples, which represent a very small portion of the entire tree. As writers, we do the same thing, but we still need to create the entire tree with the apples on it before we go and pick the apples. So the idea that we're wasting our time with bad writing is an ineffective idea and is unrealistic. If you're writing, you're never wasting your time with bad writing. If you're pouring out pages and pages and pages and you start to think, I'll never use this, you will use it, because even if there will be like phantoms of themes that you might use, and it's great practice. You'll become a better writer. And I happily throw out at least 95% of what I write, and that's part of the process. And in no way, I don't feel like I'm wasting my time, because when I am able to get the apples and harvest the apples, that is a great feeling. And it gets to a point where it's a great feeling to just be in the process of writing and not even worrying about, is it good writing or bad writing. Just it's a different mode of thinking. Instead of just thinking in your mind, the thoughts are on the page, and you get better and better and better at it, and it'll take you to a new level. So one of the biggest problems with the inline critic is the inline critic attempts to do things way before it has all the material it needs to be really effective. If you have written totally uncritically and you have before you 3 pages mostly of muck, that muck are these building blocks that your critic can then look at in its entirety and pick out the puzzle pieces and put them together. But if you have an inline critic operating, it's trying to find the puzzle pieces, but puzzle piece, 5 and 10 haven't even appeared yet. So how can it begin to work effectively? So if you like my tutorials, please take the time to check out my animation creative work at solomation.com, solomation.com. I appreciate it, and you can always hit the like button and subscribe. Another reason the inline critic does not work is that any creative thought you have becomes something different after you have put it in the world, written it down, drawn it out, acted it out. To think it and to incarnated are two very different things. So you can't really begin to work with something that hasn't been created yet. And I know this seems like if you have a thought, you're thinking, well, I can still think about it, and how does it change by putting it on the page? It's subtle, but in terms of like a thought for writing, your perspective on it is going to change. It will look different on the page than it does in your mind. You'll be able to work with it not in the moment, but you can leave it for a few weeks and come back to it, and then it'll look like a totally different idea, and you'll have a totally different viewpoint on it than you did at the time that you thought it. So in that way, it's really not effective to try to shape and reshape creative ideas before they're incarnated. By having raw creative ideas and inspiration and first incarnating it, then you can really begin to work with it for what it's going to be. By trying to work with it before you create it, that doesn't work half as well, because the decisions you make about it are going to be much better when you can actually see it and have a much better sense about what you can do with it creatively. So I can remember one time that I couldn't sleep. It was like 2 in the morning, and I was like, okay, well, I'll get up and I'll pretend like I'm going to write. I don't even care what words get down on page, or even if they're words at all. And I just wrote and wrote and wrote just to tire myself out so I could get to sleep. And about 2 paragraphs into that material to this day is some of my favorite material that I've ever written. And I wasn't even trying. And in fact, had decided ahead of time that I wasn't going to write anything. I was just going to pretend I was going to type. And I look back at that, and it was a great exercise.